Welcome to the Brett Bennis Podcast. With us today is Will Kimmins, an Army combat veteran who uses his extensive experience on the battlefield to help other veterans, first responders, and tragedy survivors heal and find their way home again. Are you ready? Let's get started. Let's just get into it. Tell me a little bit about what you do in your own words.
I'm the founder, owner, and clinical director of Overwatch Counseling Services. Kind of niche mental health practice. We're hybrid between telehealth and in-person. We're licensed currently in 5 states with a few more coming right behind it. Kind of how I got to this point. I spent 21 years on active duty in the Army. Most of that was inside a Special Operations Command. I was a Special Operations Civil Affairs officer for anybody out there who wants to immediately Google who I am and where I came from. The important part is less my job and more the journey as I was winding down. Like once you hit that 15-year mark in uniform, anybody who's responsible starts looking at what the next chapter is really going to look like, because that tells you when it's time to retire. That tells you what are you going to do after you retire, so that you don't turn into the vet who can't do anything but talk about while they were in uniform after they've left the service. And for me, when I looked at that, I looked at what I was most going to miss about being in the service. And the answer to that was very simple. It was the people that I served with. So then I started thinking, how would I stay connected to how do you stay connected to the part that you really loved while you were in? I mean, the rest of it, the job was great. I got to do things that other people, I got paid to do things that other people often pay to do. There was a lot of great things to my service, but the thing that I truly loved about it was the people I worked with. I mean, I have lifelong friends that came out of my service. So I looked at how I could best maintain that connection, and also, just because this is how I think, what I could provide kind of back to the tribe as I think of it. The tribe gave me a lot. I figured it was probably a good idea to try to give something back as I went. And what I thought about in that was some of the mental health kind of dilemmas that I saw my teammates wind up in over the course of my career. And what that really meant to me was, we hear all the time how there's a veteran's mental health crisis. I think everybody and their mother at this point has heard the 22 a day suicide number that comes out, which is disconcerting in and of itself. And I started looking at what the disconnect was there. Because if you go to any given base, go to any given command, Special Operations Command included, there's a plethora of, you have behavioral health, you have chaplaincy, you have, actual psychiatry available if you want to go the pharmacology route. Like, all these resources are there. Why do we still have this dilemma? And what I came to, actually, I didn't come to it. A mentor of mine and I were discussing that one day, and he turns to me and he says, well, people like us need a therapist like us. Like, it doesn't work because the people who are trying to offer this help are extremely well-intentioned and generally very well trained, but they don't have that fundamental base plate connection. Like, the line that I use with new patients is, a lot of therapists can't tell you what the air smells like when you get off a plane in Iraq. I can, because I've been there more than I would have liked to be there. But
Yeah.
In looking at that kind of gave me my eureka moment, if you will. And I said, people like us need a therapist like us. So that means I got to turn me into a therapist. And so for a few years of nights and weekends and a certain amount of madness, I went through a second master's degree out of Wake Forest University, who was really great through the whole process. Did some clinical work as a student intern, and managed to come through with a clinical mental health counseling is the formal title on my second master's degree, with a licensure to practice on the back end. And so Overwatch Counseling Services was born.
So I love that it wasn't so much that perhaps it sounded like you didn't always want to be a therapist. It was more kind of community focused, where it's like, you see this gap and someone needs to fill this gap. So I'm going to step up and do that. Is that accurate?
That's very much how it went. What I wrote down in my notebook as I'm a guy that, like, I live and die by 3x5 cards and notebooks and little journals that, like, keep me moving through my thought process over the course of the months and weeks. And right about the time that I committed to this path, I wrote down, if this is a problem and nobody else is able to work this problem, then I'll step forward and work this problem because it needs to be dealt with.
It reminds me of that. There's a phrase that you often hear where, like, leaders, great leaders, people who do great things often don't seek them out. They have it thrust upon them in that they see that something needs done and they just do it. They're not trying to be a hero. They just see that something needs done.
I like that. I actually really like that mentality. Sort of the one who should rule is the one who would rather do anything else.
Exactly. So had you had any prior experience on the receiving end of therapy before you stepped into the field?
I had from a weird kind of angle. So several of the units that I worked with have what's called an operational psychologist on staff at the unit, which on its surface seems like, oh, well, they've got a therapist on staff because that unit does things that are difficult and might be trying for people's mental health. And that's not really what an op psych is for. Op psychs are there to optimize the unit, to make sure that it's doing its missions effectively, to kind of watch for guys that are cracking up, who might need to step back, step off the line, and actually deal with some things. They're less for the therapy space. But what did come out of it was I made really good friends with the op psych that was at the unit when I first applied to grad school to do this. And he became a really good sounding board for, hey doc, I'm thinking about this. What do you think about this? Hey doc, I'm learning about this and I'm not sure it's quite right. What do you think about this? And I'm sure we'll get into it later, but there's a lot of the way I practice that it doesn't fly in the face of traditional therapy, but it tweaks certain elements of it. I think every therapist does that at some point. We kind of decide, yeah, that this needs to be slightly different. I need to approach this slightly differently. I just started doing that from the start because I had, like, an actual doctor in, like, a doctor of psychology available to me for me to bounce these things against, to be like, hey, I want to make sure I'm not just out of my mind thinking this might be the way to do this.
A little bit more of a mentor figure in that way.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you practice predominantly with veterans, or do you do it veteran, civilian, doesn't matter?
So the way it works right now, I started out with almost purely veterans. Like, I started out with guys like me, which was and is really rewarding work, and it's absolutely central to the mission of my practice. But one of the units I was in spent a lot of time working with a major metropolitan police department's emergency response unit, what everybody thinks of as a SWAT team. And in talking with those guys in my other capacity, in my military capacity, I sorted out that they were a lot like us. You know, plus you figure those guys go on high risk warrants every week in general, depending on the city you're in. So they've seen about as much stuff as a multi-tour combat vet has. And from there, I ended up talking to some career homicide detectives. And from there, I ended up talking to firemen and EMTs. And I completely accidentally tripped and fell into, but either way, I ended up working with kids who had survived human trafficking and they were trying to reintegrate those kids back into regular society after some really unpleasant is an extreme understatement, but some very traumatizing pieces of their childhoods. And what I found was that there were common characteristics across all of those populations. So what I like to tell people I focus on is chronic trauma survivors. And the way I define that is someone who, over the course of months or years, has been exposed to events that individually could cause what we think of as acute post-traumatic stress disorder. They've coped with it fine. In a lot of cases, they've thrived in it. But what ends up happening is the things that get you through a gunfight, or that get you through an EMS call, or that help you survive a trafficking ring, generally don't work well when you're trying to cope with healthy stress, like normal stress, like regular stress. And that's where these populations struggle. So a lot of what I do is unpacking the fact that there's not a single trauma event that we could go back through, and through various forms of traditional psychotherapy, we could unpack, examine, integrate. If we're going to do like EMDR, is one of the eye movement desensitization and reprogramming, is one of the primary therapies used right now for PTSD. There's not a single trauma memory with these populations for me to go back to and for us to reprogram. Therefore, this is the population that comes through, multiple successful rounds of EMDR therapy, but the problem is still there, because what we're having to unpack is, this is how you survived through a lot of really nasty stuff. We need to separate how that worked from how regular society worked. And it makes it very hard to do a lot of the traditional therapies that are involved in trauma work, because I can't, like, easy example, one of the therapies that you'll see endorsed within therapist training programs, like graduate programs, is what we call progressive re-exposure, or progressive exposure, PE therapy, which is you take someone who has acute PTSD and you gradually re-expose them to increasingly longer intervals of one or more of the stimuli that triggers the trauma response within them, until such time as they're able to integrate their cognition about it. They're able to address the thinking, feeling, acting pattern that goes into some of those triggering episodes. And at that point, once they're able to experience it for as long as they choose to allow themselves to be exposed to it, we consider that kind of the end of that particular form of therapy, and we consider that trauma event to be resolved. Well, I get people who, one of their trauma events is having a Black Hawk crash. Well, how many Black Hawk helicopters do I have available to go out and crash? Do I even have sound files that I could play? And more importantly for these people, is it really necessary for us to unpack everything so that they can be re-exposed to being near a crashing helicopter? I mean, to an extent, that should be a problematic experience for people. They should be shaken up by that. So we're also trying to normalize their trauma response so that things that should be a problem, they're able to react to like they're a problem, but things that aren't a problem, like somebody cutting you off on the freeway, doesn't result in you trying to run them into the guardrail, no matter how annoying Baltimore traffic may be.
So if I can summarize a little bit about what I'm hearing you say, it sounds like you help bring people home from the battlefield.
In some ways.
So let's go back to those type of people. What might someone be experiencing in their daily life, or what might someone have experienced that they're struggling with that would clue them into, I need to seek out a will?
I'm actually really glad you asked that, because it doesn't look like what modern media, TVs and movies would have you think you should be looking for. So what I tell people to look for, they're the traditional signs of PTSD, which are pretty easy to spot. Hypervigilance, you consistently feel like you're under threat at all times. The easiest way for me to kind of note that is someone who always has an extreme startle response. Like anytime somebody sneaks up on them, they're in full fight or flight mode. if you're experiencing that to the point, and the other thing is, we say in the mental health profession, a problem is only a problem when it's a problem. To say these things which you might identify in your own life are not necessarily cause to seek out intensive treatment or things along those lines, unless they're actually interfering with your daily life. So the problem is really only a problem when it actually causes you a problem.
So, for example, with the hypervigilance, which is something that I deal with. If my neighbor, like this is something I've dealt with for a long time, I'm in therapy, I'm working through it. But if my neighbor drops a pin, I mean, a little bit exaggerating, but drops a pin 2 doors down at 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear it and I'm up, and it drives me nuts. It drives my wife nuts that I constantly have fans going. I live in an apartment, so that sort of thing where it disrupts my sleep every night. Sounds like what you're talking about.
Yeah, my version of it, my personal version that I experience of it is I walk out of buildings and immediately start checking roof lines because of how much I trace it back to how much time I spent doing work in and out of cities in the Middle East. Because if somebody's on a roof line, then it means they're either watching you for a reason that may or may not be good, or something is about to kick off. It's just one of those things that I've never been able to get rid of. And I do it to the point where I walk out of the grocery store and check the roof lines of the fast food places in the parking lot. That's hypervigilance. I'm not necessarily worried about it because it doesn't stop me from doing what I'm planning to do that day. It doesn't halt me in my tracks. I'm not necessarily losing sleep over it. It just is one of those weird isms that my wife and my kids have noticed over the years. So there's that.
So for you, this isn't. This isn't exactly an indicator that you should seek out a will. But what would be something that is?
So if you've had an incident, and I've known guys that have ended up with this, where somebody tapped you on the shoulder and you reacted violently because your fight or flight response kicked into gear and you immediately attack. That's a problem. That's gonna stop your kid from walking up and wanting to hug dad. That's gonna stop your girlfriend, wife, boyfriend, whatever significant other you might happen to have in your life from attempting to show you normal, healthy affection because they don't want to get punched in the face. That's time. That's actually well past time to go seek out somebody like me. Other examples would be, I've known people so everybody's had that experience being on the road and you notice a car that's a few cars back from you, maybe it tailgates you for a little while, and it seems like it's following you. At first it's because you're on the same road, but then you notice that oh, it took that turn that I just took, and then it took this other turn that I just took. I've known people and I've worked with people who will then spend 45 minutes driving surveillance detection routes near their houses because they're convinced that this is actually somebody following them. That's an issue. That's not as bad as it could be. You didn't attack anyone. There was no violence involved in it. But nobody likes to lose 45 minutes of their life because somebody was a jerk in traffic. That's a sign if it's affecting you to that level. And this is what I mean by starting to mess with your day-to-day life. We talk about flashbacks. Flashbacks don't look like, you don't get a lot of people. I've met a few, but you don't get a lot of people who are truly it comes with auditory and visual hallucinations where physically back in their own mind, they are physically back on the battlefield, hearing the sounds, seeing the sights. What it looks like instead for a lot of people is a triggering of an emotional response, or we talk about thinking, feeling, acting patterns a lot in mental health. And what I mean by that is, easy example from my own life. I spent most of my career at Fort Bragg, when it was Fort Bragg the first time, in North Carolina. But during one of my years, I was moved out to Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. And it so happened that this was required within, I think it was less than 60 days after I got off the plane from an Afghanistan deployment, that I had to be out in El Paso. And what you wouldn't know if you had been in both places is that the Franklin Mountain Range, which is the mountain range that touches South Texas and the Mexican border, looks a lot like some of the mountains in Uruzgan province and Kandahar province. So I got out of the car in El Paso and didn't realize what was going on, but I was immediately on high alert. And I was on high alert because it looked like where I had been about 2 months prior to that. And it wasn't like I didn't think the other side was about to come over the wall and into my house or anything like that. It was just, I was jumpy, I was snappy, I was difficult to talk to for a few days because I had gone into this place where we have to be under threat because the environment feels very much the same. Like
Your
that's
subconscious started picking up cues and kicked into gear.
Mhm. And that's the kind of flashback that you want to look for. And it, in that case, yeah, I would put that at the threshold of, hey, it's time to go talk to somebody, because it did change how I interacted with my wife and kids. It did change how well I was able to function even at work, because I went from generally kind of go with the flow flexible, like they teach you to be at the School for Special Children at Fort Bragg, to very rigid, very, like, any change to the plan of the day threw me for a major loop. I had trouble just dealing with normal shifts in operational tempo. Traffic drove me absolutely insane for a couple of weeks there. That's enough infringement or degradation of your quality of life on a daily basis that you might want to think about going and talking to someone if that's what happens.
So let's say someone is watching this conversation and they start picking up some clues that they might be experiencing that. What would be say their next? Well, first let's go into someone struggling today. They're in that place where you were. They're getting snappy. They're getting reactive. What's something that someone can do today to kind of help ease those nerves and kind of get back into a better operating place?
Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to recommend, and yeah, it's kind of a shameless plug, but trust me, it's to a good cause, is you're going to go to www.overwatchcounseling.com. On that page, there's a tab for resources, because I, as a mental health professional, recognize that not everybody's ready to commit to weekly sessions, twice weekly sessions, every other week session. Not everybody's ready to step all the way into the process yet. So what I try to do for folks, and honestly, when I was in that state, I would have resisted. I would have been that client that therapists were like, all right, I guess we're going to sit here for a month until you decide that you're actually willing to participate in this. So I would have been resistant. So what I try to do is I try to put as much free content as I can for people out into the general environment, because I feel that the more I can help general mental health in the population, the better. So if you go to that tab on my website, there's a bunch of blog posts on there that deal with some of this stuff. There are infographics for what are called mindfulness grounding techniques, to get nerdy and biopsych on you for a minute. So the fight or flight response within the human body that kicks on a lot, it causes a cortisol dump, it causes a lot of epinephrine to hit your bloodstream, and it's what gives you that, like, increased heartbeats, rapid respiration, tunnel vision in some cases, because your body is preparing for what it sees as a threat to its continued existence, and it is preparing to do absolutely anything necessary in order to protect itself or the people that it cares most about. What we try to do is activate what's a little bit less well known, that we call the rest and digest function. It's the opposite of the fight or flight response, and the way you kick that on is you deliberately slow respiration. So there's something that we call the box breathing method that most people from various places. I first learned it in the military, actually, as a method of managing stress during operations. I have infographics for that. I have infographics for that lay out how to do some additional mindfulness.
And so box
Interve-
breathing would be like the inhale, hold, exhale, hold for like, was
yeah,
it 4 seconds?
the way I do it, so I use a 4 second box. So it's 4 second inhale as deep as you can, hold for 4 seconds, exhale as powerfully as you can. Try to empty your lungs completely for 4 seconds. Hold at the bottom for 4 seconds. You repeat that 4 times because 4 times will take you out past a minute. And what we know from a few empirical studies, beyond a minute of doing this, you have typically dumped enough oxygen into your bloodstream by deliberately breathing in this manner that your heart will slow down because it no longer feels a deficit to get oxygen to your muscles. Heart slows down, breathing has slowed down, your body starts to reabsorb some of those excitatory hormones that have gone into your bloodstream. And the next thing you know, everything's a little bit more approachable. Tunnel vision opens back up. You start to really like the joke that I use with a lot of people is you start to realize it really was just a suit jacket on a hanger on the bed on the chair in your bedroom and not a monster in the corner.
Yeah.
So
So
if you hit that
someone's struggling right now. Start off with the box breathing. Do the
yep.
4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, 4 seconds hold, and then go to your website. Go look at the other resources. Low barrier to entry.
Yeah, feel free to hop right past the box breathing graphic on there since we already talked about it. But there's a few others that are really useful on there. There's some progressive relaxation stuff. There's some guided visualization stuff. Um, Things to help, particularly with anxiety disorders, because what an anxiety disorder is it's your body and your mind attempting to adapt to the inability to create expectation for the future. Therefore, you're designed to create a worst case scenario because we all know prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Well, if you don't know what's coming, then you have to build what the worst is going to be. Anxiety disorders happen when people start doing what we call ruminating, which is almost like a looping thought pattern around that concern, and it becomes harder and harder to get out of. So we use things called that are referred to as thought stopping techniques. Then we use things that are mindfulness based and grounding based. We use some guided visualization and we hyper focus on the details of the environment that you're in. Because if you can focus hard enough on those details, then there's not room for your mind to drag you out of the here and now and into that worst case scenario.
Awesome. Thank you so much for going through that. And I'm going to put that link in the description of the video for anyone who follows on after this. So let's say the person they've dealt with the problem today. They're a little bit more calm, but they realize that they need to move forward and try to get some help from someone like you. What are their first 3 steps?
So, first step would be determine what kind of course of action you want here. So if you're looking for, you're feeling what you think of as some depressive symptoms, you're feeling some anxious stress, maybe all these people want is a medication based solution. As a therapist, I don't advocate that. We use meds in my practice. I don't prescribe. I have a couple of prescribers who I work with, and we take a team based approach because our belief on how to use meds is that it gives you the room to deal with the symptom in front of you, with the exception of things that are organic disorders like brain formation disorders, some of the things that talk therapy is minimally effective at, has efficacy. And I freely admit that there are I can't resolve everything in the world with talk therapy. There are some things that will require a pharmacological intervention, and that's okay if you're also trying to approach it. I'm a big believer in my practice of agency is the thing that resolves this for a lot of people, increasing the patient's agency. As long as you're doing the work to take as much control of it as is possible for you, then I have no problem with somebody using a medication-based solution. I think that's probably smart, especially when you deal with some of these symptoms that are so intense we can't do the work in talk therapy because the client just can't approach it.
So step 1 is figure out what direction you want to take.
Step two would be, once you've sorted that out, I don't recommend the just cold Google search for therapy in my area. But if you choose to go that route, then what you're going to want to do is look at either the profile listings for the therapist that you find or the websites for the therapist that you find, and look for them to identify what their theoretical approach is. Mental health is one of these really interesting things, and why we're a little bit different from the medical health model is that in mental health, there are many roads to the same destination. And it really depends on who you're working with in terms of which one of those roads you're going to take. So, easy example, I identify most closely with brief solution focused therapy. I find that that increases agency in my clients, that it provides more immediate symptom relief, and that it gets us to where we're scaffolding off of their successes into the future, so they increase time. So if you come to see me, we're going to deal with what's happening right here, right now. And then we're going to work either forwards or backwards from there. If dealing with that doesn't actually yield a result, then we're going to dig in further. And if that doesn't work, then we're going to continue digging in further. And periodically, I'm going to look at what's going on with you in terms of, we're going to do this together collaboratively. We're going to sit and we're going to talk about, all right, your goals were this. We've tried this technique and these interventions. Does it feel like it's working? And depending on your answers to that, then I'll either completely shift the clinical approach that I take, which is why I say I identify most closely with one particular type of therapy, but I'm not a purist when it comes to anything. I'm the guy that will pull anything out of the therapeutic toolbox if I think it's going to help. But that's me. But if you go to a psychodynamic therapist, that person's theoretical alignment tells you that they believe almost all of the problems that you're dealing with today likely result from something in your childhood that then shaped how you deal with the world as an adult. And they're going to start digging back towards your childhood to find that thing, whatever it might be. And then they're going to work forward once they found it to say, okay, well, then that affected you here, and that changed this, and that altered this. If you're not here for that, because it does take a little bit longer, if that's not a thing that appeals to you, then it's okay to say, I don't think I want to go with that one. I think I want to go with somebody else over here. There's a plethora of theoretical alignments out there. So know who you're actually working with. And honestly, even if you have a couple of sessions with a therapist, if it doesn't feel like it's working, then it's okay to say, look, this isn't working for me. I need to look at doing something else. So that's kind of step two. And then step three would be having an initial consult call or screening call with either that therapist or that therapist's practice. And you should show up to that with some questions of your own, and not just, I'm here and I would like help. I mean, if you come to my practice like that, then I'm absolutely I'm going to set you on the schedule. We're going to work through what's going on. But it's not only okay, I strongly encourage people to ask things like, this is what I'm dealing with. How long do you think I'm going to need to spend in therapy at this point? For reference, nobody's going to give you a specific answer on that, but they're going to give you a general, like, okay, typically clients come and work with me for this long. I don't know the exact specifics of your case, so I don't want to give you and that's the other thing, be skeptical of people that tell you without an intake session that they can figure out exactly how long you're going to be in therapy. Likewise, they should be asking you for, what are your goals? What do you need to feel safe while you're talking to me about this? What actually resonated with you about what you know about me? And then what kind of symptoms are we talking about? How is this affecting your day-to-day life? If anybody gets on a call with you and just says, yeah, sure, I can help, like, full story, but you probably want to know a little bit more, because within mental health, you never know what you're going to end up doing with any particular client. So you really should be looking at it from the perspective of tailoring your approach as a clinician to the person sitting across from you.
because it's a relationship more than it is a transaction, something that you you have to find the right person, at least for this stage of your healing. So you would say, step one, figure out where you want to go with this. Step two, like work through, like go and actually look at your options and figure out what are some therapists that are that are dealing with things in the way that you need, or in the way they at least have on their website things that are in line with what you're looking for. And then third is start the relationship with an interview. And it sounds like you would advocate for trying multiple, as in like interviewing multiple until you find the right one. Is that correct?
Yes. So I view it kind of like shopping around for any think of anything major in your life that you purchase. Home, car, anything like that. Like, it's entirely possible that you find the absolute perfect one right out of the gate at your first showing. Everything's perfect. But statistically, that's not what's going to happen. So it is perfectly okay if you don't feel that connection, or if you give it a session or two and it just doesn't feel right, to say, look, I really don't think this is working for me. I'm going to talk to some other folks about this. And most of the therapists that I know, particularly the ones that I work with frequently, aren't going to take that personally. You're not going to hurt their feelings. You're not impugning their ability as a healer or trying to invalidate the approach to therapy that they take. It just doesn't work for you. Likewise, like, if you go the medication route, your doctor will tell you, hey, we might have to try 2 or 3 of these things that are all supposed to target the same symptom before we hit the one that works specifically for you. It's the same deal. It's actually more specific when you're dealing with therapists, because now you're dealing with people. Maybe you just don't vibe with that particular therapist. That's okay. It shouldn't hurt that therapist's feelings.
So I'd love to go back a little bit to, you touched on this in the first step, and it's touching on a little bit different topic, but you mentioned working with other practitioners and kind of having a little bit more of a team-based approach. And we talked about this a little bit in the beginning. I'd love for you to kind of describe that a little bit. And first, if we could start out with just like, what is your understanding? Because I know you have a kind of a broader perspective of wellness than perhaps is common. What is your perspective on where your practice sits in the spectrum and in the journey of someone's wellness journey?
I got you. So in terms of where I sit, that's as individual as the person going through their journey. So I've met plenty of people that originally started working on what they thought was a purely physical health issue. And then about midway through, they found themselves struggling mindset wise. They found themselves struggling. Like, therapists aren't just here for when you have like these monumental issues that you want to deal with. We're also here for things like, I'm struggling with a self-discipline issue in terms of doing my physical therapy exercises. And I think it's probably because I'm scared that the physical therapy is not going to work and I'm not going to get the function back after an injury or a surgery. Sure, man. There's nothing that says you can't come in and talk to somebody like me for, a short time, like 3 to 5 sessions kind of deal, where we're just going to talk about, okay, what's your mindset? What do you want your mindset to be? And I'm going to help you find a path from A to B on that. So for those people, I sit somewhere in the middle. But there are also people, every new client who comes through my door, one of the first things we're going to talk about in your intake session is, what kind of physical health are you in? When's the last time you were checked out by a medical doctor? What's your diet look like? Are you repeating the supersize me experiment from a few years ago and trying to see how much fast food you can take down in a week? Or are you, vegan and eating purely vegan every week? Or are you just trying to eat clean? Like, what does that actually look like? I have a dietitian who I work with who's great, that I will freely refer you over to. And a lot of people don't know this. You can get that kind of care covered by a lot of insurance plans, because insurance is finally starting to figure out that keeping people healthy is a lot less expensive than letting people get sick and then having to fix the problem. So
That's
they'll often,
amazing. That's a
yeah,
I love that you're saying that, because that is absolutely crucial for like moving from this crisis management mentality in insurance to like actually prevention.
absolutely. So we do that. We talk about what your exercise routine looks like. Do you have an exercise routine, first of all? And to be clear, we're not trying to turn you into an Olympic weightlifter. We're not trying to have you win the CrossFit games. But people tend to experience less anxiety and less depression when they are less sedentary, more mobile, where they actually use their bodies to what their bodies were designed to be used for. So part of that is, hey man, I don't care if you have gained 150 pounds from what you thought your ideal body weight should be and you haven't worked out in 15 years. All good. I just want you to get off the couch and go walk like we'll start simple with a few hundred yards every day. Not a big deal. Anybody can do it. It also has the advantage of getting you outside. And I have some physical therapists that I refer people to. I know some trainers that I've referred people to in the past. It's all you want to take that on. And for that matter, the other thing that I tell a lot of people, because I do work with a lot of veterans, is we're going to try to normalize and make your relationship to exercise a little bit more healthy, because in the military you develop this weird fixation
Absolutely.
that if I'm not like dying during the workout and I'm not so sore that I can't walk up the stairs afterwards, then I didn't do it right. I need to go back and do it harder. And
And then you absolutely hate working out, and you balloon up immediately after you get out.
and you are resistant to going back in because you think what's going to happen when you go back in is that I'm immediately going to give you a PT test or something and off we're going to go. That's not how we work here. Like, a workout can be, take your dog for a walk, man. I'm certified. I have a graduate certificate for animal assisted therapy. So I spend a lot of time I do equine therapy and canine therapy for people. And in doing that, like, you want to talk about something that really kind of is holistic and brings everything back together. Like, let's get you a dog. Let's help you train that dog. We're going to use that as part of your therapy, because at the end of every session where we're training the dog, we're going to talk about some things, but you're going to be able to walk away saying, wait, I did that. Like, I did this thing. And the more I can increase your sense of competence and therefore your confidence in yourself, the better we're going to do long term. So, a workout can be take the dog for a walk. A workout can be, go like I've literally, I wouldn't say prescribed, but I've literally directed clients in the past to go weed their garden for an hour each day between usually the hours of 1:00 and 4:00 p.m., whatever time zone they happen to be in, because then they're going to soak up the most sunlight while they're outside. Use sunscreen. Skin cancer is a thing. But with that, I'm a firm believer that the mind-body connection is a very real thing. So if the body is disordered, then it's a lot easier to have the mind become disordered. If the mind is disordered, it's a lot easier for the body to become unhealthy, because the mind is trying to cope with whatever stimuli are setting it off in whatever way it can figure out. And the simple fact that I've learned over the course of doing this and being in the military is that if you look at unhealthy coping mechanisms like substance use, whatever that might be, whether it's alcohol, whether it's cigarettes, whether that's narcotics, marijuana is legal in a lot of states now. So pick your thing. What those coping mechanisms are as addictive as they are, because they work for what the mind is trying to do with them. Like, if you're using drugs because you want to blank out certain experiences from your life and the drug blanks those out, then the mind isn't paying attention to the physical toll that takes on your body, even though that's undeniable. So when we look at people who struggle with substance abuse problems and we go, how could you do this to yourself? Like, look what it's doing to you physically. Yeah, in the cold light of day, I can hold up a before and after photo and that person will tell you that's a very bad thing. But when they don't have another way to cope with whatever it is that is triggering them, then yeah, they're going to reach for whatever they can. And those things get their hooks in the way they do because they work. They're just profoundly unhealthy many, many other ways. That's why substance abuse work is an entire discipline within the mental health community, because it's so widespread.
Yeah, in my experience, and I know this is a little bit of a broad statement, but we tend to medicate, and by medicate I mean like stimulate and try to drown out that sort of thing. Not sometimes official medication as well, but we tend to medicate the symptoms in order to escape the root causal pain. And kind of going back to what you said earlier, my personal kind of philosophy about this is like, barring anything destructive for you or the people around you, like medication is fine. Medicating yourself is fine as long as you're working on that root pain, because then it's temporary. But if you never address that, then the medication becomes an addiction, becomes a lifestyle, becomes who you are.
Yep.
So I would love for you to go into a little bit, because it sounds like you already have a great kind of holistic approach, not just about yourself, about your own practice, but about the way that you integrate other people into it. What are some of the other types of practitioners that you bring into your partnership, your care of your clients, and how might that partnership look for another practitioner who wants to do something similar?
So the first thing for another practitioner looking to do something similar is start out by making friends with people. Like, I don't know why sometimes therapists struggle with this, because we talk with people all day long. But people are a lot more likely to work with you if you approach it from a personal relationship perspective rather than a professional sort of business related relationship. At that point, we seem to put that in a different cognitive compartment than we do somebody we have an actual relationship to. So that's point one. But in terms of people that I've brought onto the team while working with various clients, I have no problem if your religious faith is extremely important to you or central to you. And I advocate for folks having a strong belief system. The thing I tell a lot of my clients is, I'm not as interested in what you believe specifically as I am that you believe it. Because what we know from some of the clinical literature is that having a strong belief system makes you more resilient to traumatic stress. It makes you more resilient to some of these mental health symptoms. Now, that's not a plug for any particular church, any particular denomination of said church, or any particular religion, monotheism, pantheism, what have you. What it is having something, even if it's just a really strong, like, personal moral compass, if that's what you got, as long as you believe in that, then that is reinforcing to your physical and mental health. So I've worked with clergy who were very important to my clients in the past. I'm non-discriminatory in terms of who I will bring onto the team or who I'm willing to work with, provided we have all of the appropriate administrative paperwork in place, because everything I do is covered by the Health Information Portability Act, HIPAA, as people may have heard of it. So any therapist who doesn't ask you to sign a release of information before talking to someone other than you about the content of your care should be a red flag to you. You should really have a conversation with that person. But as long as we've got that in place, I'm not opposed to bringing almost anybody in, as long as that person is going to help rather than hinder.
So my wife has this concept that she found very important in her own healing journey, which my wife's name is Tanai for the viewers. She calls Team Tanai. And so, for example, what you're saying is Team Brett, you would be a part of my team. And then I would also, perhaps as a client, I would maybe connect you with, hey, this other person is really important. And this other person is really important for my physical health, mental health, these things. And perhaps you guys might work together. Or is it something that you might have like a pre-existing, these are some people that I would reach out to for referral, which is something you mentioned earlier.
So it can go in either direction. It's always pretty cool when a new client brings in, hey, this is my primary care doctor who's been prescribing this, and this for me. I'd like you to to consult with them a little bit, or hey, this is I work with a dietitian who has had me on this diet for a while. Maybe we should talk about that a little bit. So that's one way that I very much encourage, like the head of Team Brett in this case is Brett. Like, it's not me, it's you. So the people that you see fit to bring in are who we're going to bring in. Now, the folks that I often refer out to, well, not refer out, the people who I advocate bringing onto the team are often, like I said, are you working with a medical doctor? Because you'd be surprised how many folks come in and they haven't had a medical checkup or any blood work done in forever and a day. Well, if I don't know what's going on mechanically and organically inside your body, it's going to be a lot harder for me to help what's going on with your mind. Likewise, I'll recommend, if you tell me, hey, I haven't worked out in 10 years for various reasons, I've had injuries, this, that, and the other, then I'm going to say, okay, well, I have a professional relationship with this physical therapy shop, and I have a professional relationship with this personal trainer. At your discretion, you feel free to drop my name, but reach out to these folks. I'll be happy to put you in touch with them if you'd like. But it's ultimately your choice. Like, of the bedrock concepts in how I practice, deliberate choice on the part of the client and building the agency of that client, which kind of go hand in hand if you think about it. But what I often say during session is, I don't care what choice you make, whether I personally think it's healthy or unhealthy, as long as it's not going to do you immediate grievous harm, I'm going to support you either way. It's you making that choice. Because, easy example, some folks, when they get into that ruminating anxiety cycle, that kind of what a lot of people refer to as the anxious spiral, they get into that and they're just unable or unwilling to get out of it at that particular moment. And what I say to those folks is, it's okay. You can choose to stay right here in the distress that you're feeling right now. That's all right. That's a valid choice that you can choose to make. What I want you to consider is what that actually means for you. So are you sitting in it because you're going to, one of the things I've done with folks in the past is because you're going to set a timer and just allow yourself to feel all your feelings for a little while because it's built up and you've been dissociating. And then at the end of the 5-minute timer, you're going to go back to the box. You're going to go back to box breathing. You're going to go back to some of the other interventions that we have to bring yourself back out of it. Okay, cool. I'm here for it. I'll sit right here for 6.5 minutes while you do what you need to do, and then we'll come back. Or are you doing it because you are not making a choice in that moment? And anybody who's been in the military will tell you that no choice is still a choice, but that's not what we're getting at. Instead is, are you staying in that anxious spiral because you're paralyzed from making a choice? And at that point is when you need, yeah.
And if I might just riff on that a little bit, because I've personally found that to be incredibly powerful. And the way that I kind of think of it is being on offense versus defense in life and in my mentality about my life. And one of the biggest things that I found, it's no one can make me go from defense to offense. If people are trying to badger you into it, you just retreat further and further if you're in that place of defense in your mind. But if you can get to the point of, like what you're saying is, like, make a choice, is you're switching that, you're flipping that switch in your head of, like, I'm going on offense. And one of the most amazing things that I want everyone to know, as impossible as the thing in front of you feels when you're on defense, it feels like a mountain of bricks that's weighing you down and you just can't escape it. But as soon as you can flip that switch, it becomes so much lighter and so much easier to take the next step.
Absolutely.
Just making that choice, like you said, just going from defense to offense, and, like, no, I'm happening to this. I am not powerless. I can do something. Even if it's not much, I can do something. And then that mountain of bricks becomes like 20 bricks. And it's like, it's still hard, but it's not nearly what it was just by making that switch.
And I love that. And what we do is, if you make enough little choices whatever they might be. I've worked with clients who had severe, like major depressive disorder, like can't get out of bed, major depressive disorder. Make one choice. Make a choice to get up. I don't care if you do anything once you get up. Make the choice to get up. Next time, okay, you made the choice to get up. Now make the choice to brush your teeth, which is actually really hard for folks who are stuck down in, I think of depression as like a hole that you're stuck in. Anxiety is a spiral or a loop. Depression's often a hole. You're stuck down in there. It's actually really hard to do just the activities of daily life. I have a whole series on the blog on my website called Self-Care Saturdays, specifically designed for people who struggle with just basic taking care of themselves type stuff. Make that choice, because what we do, and this is the beauty of building agency and the client, we take those little successes and we build you your own pile of bricks. So little success after little success after little success becomes a big pile of success. And it's a lot easier to stand on top of that and look at where you're trying to go.
You start to build momentum in a way. And then after you've built some momentum, what you're saying, you're building your own pile of bricks. You now have that to look back on. And the more of those that you build, it's more like you have more you have people on your team almost that are being able to fight this fight with you, just with every experience that you build. I love that. So speaking of obviously mental health and all this, one of the big things that I have noticed is that practitioners of health tend to be their own worst patients. How do you, as a mental health practitioner, as a wellness practitioner, how do you take care of yourself and make sure that what you are doing for other people doesn't drain you and ultimately just take you down?
The first thing I recommend in this kind of category is keep people around you who are willing to point out when your behavior changes. Because I can tell you, like, I'm married. My wife is my best barometer for whether or not I'm stretching myself too thin, pushing myself too hard, because she's the one that'll step up and go, you're acting differently. Something's going on. What's going on? Not in a therapist sort of way, but just in a I care about you and this looks different kind of way. So first thing is find yourself a barometer that's not you. The reason that doctors, therapists, pick your other healing profession, become the worst patients is because we think we can self-assess and self-treat. And it simply doesn't work, because what you find yourself doing is changing your clinical assessment of yourself based on what you want to be doing or what you want to have happen that particular day. So you'll minimize symptoms, or you'll pretend that symptoms aren't there, or you'll be like, well, it's there, but it's not clinically significant. And then the next thing you know, you're just all the way off the overstimulated edge, and you're not 100% sure how you got there. So first point is find yourself a barometer. The second point is find some things that you love to do that benefit you. Now, it's cool if they benefit other people. Like your father, I would be willing to bet that one of your self-care activities is spending time with your child, just flat out. It's reinforcing, it feeds the soul. It's very much how one of the ways that you conduct self-care yourself. Most people do. Other things that I do, I draw great therapeutic effect from making things with my hands, working with my hands. So that gets me into I work on cars. I build furniture in my garage that's usually pretty good, but but it's less about what I actually produced than the fact that I produced it. I take therapeutic effect from creating something tangible myself that I can look at and go, okay, I did that. Because at the end of the day, just like we keep talking about, if I can look at something and say, I did that, then that's a small success that allows me to kind of look at it and go, well, if I can do that, then I can do other things. It's like a riff on the make your bed every day philosophy that certain other clinicians and certain former commanders of U.S. military branches have often put out there. But it really is. I like to have that one tangible thing, and I like the rhythms and the simplicity of building things or fixing things with my hands. I find it deeply rewarding. Now, I'm not saying everybody needs to be out there, changing oil in the driveway. What I am saying is find something that does that for you. And if you're struggling to get to that point, maybe book a session with somebody like me so you can figure that out. Like that's the other thing. Coming to therapy is not an indefinite commitment. In fact, it should be a very definite commitment. It's just based on what you actually want to accomplish. So it's less, help, I don't know what to do, because that indicates a complete lack of agency, and more, I'm struggling with this. Now, whether this is, I have night terrors every night, I run around my house, my family is scared of me because they can't get near me, and I'm constantly in a state of fight or flight. Okay, it's going to take a while, but that's one set. I want to work on this. Or it could be, I don't have anything in my life that I feel like is restorative, that feeds the parts of me that aren't necessarily the physical. Ooh, let's sit down and work on. I would love to sit down and work on that with people, because I feel like if we all found something that has that restorative effect for us, then honestly, I wouldn't have to do as much of the really real intense healing work that I do in my practice.
So that's interesting. That actually brings up something that I was thinking about earlier and wanted to get back to, but you just kind of clarified it for me in a way that I feel like is really important. Earlier, I was kind of trying to understand what type of care would come before yours, and then when would yours come into play, and then what type of care would come after. It sounds like what you're describing is much more of a like project-based care, where you build your team, but then you have personal projects that you have on your wellness goal, milestones, whatever, and then you bring your team in for a definite amount of time in order to have that holistic care, fix the night terrors, the relationship problems, the health problems, all that in this part, and then perhaps that comes to a natural conclusion, but you still have your team. It's just a matter of like, what area of your life, what project are you working on in that with those people at that time? Would you say that's accurate?
I think that's accurate. I also think it's important for folks who've never interacted with the therapy sphere to understand that it's okay to finish therapy and then have to come back to therapy. Like, it can be an in and out process. It's not, and it doesn't make you broken, and it doesn't make you weak. It's not as if, we tried we found the cure and then the cure stopped working because you didn't cure hard enough at it. That's not how this works. But it's perfectly okay. And that's why everybody who finishes treatment with me leaves with, I have a standard kind of talk that I give during our final session where I said, look, these are some signs to look for based on your individual course of treatment that we worked on, that tell you might want to come back and talk to me. And if that happens, you're going to have my direct email address because you've worked with me. So you have my direct practice email address. I want you to email me in a certain period of time. I will get you onto the schedule regardless of what the wait list looks like at that particular moment, because I'm not going to have to, this isn't starting brand new. Like, you and I already have a professional relationship. It's perfectly acceptable to come back. It usually doesn't take nearly as long the second time you come back as it did the first time. Because now, to keep with your phrasing, now we have a new project, but we're not rebuilding the team from scratch. We're just getting the band back together for an encore.
Encore, love that. So, and I've definitely experienced from my own healing journey and from those that I've helped, that contrary to what people believe, like, healing tends to be, it's not like a circle, but it is kind of like a spiral where you heal something and then you go and experience other parts of life, and then there's another layer that opens up as a result that you kind of have to circle back to and get a deeper level of healing, a higher level of wellness. And then for someone who's not aware of that, going back to the same place, it feels like the same place when you're in it. because like, oh, I thought I fixed this and now I'm back where it feels like I'm right back where I started. But from the outside, you're actually not. You've made it quite a ways. You're just in the back. You're just in the same area that you were working in before, and you're circling back to a related project. So I'd love to get a little bit more as we start wrapping up, just some idea on, you mentioned the resources that you have on your website. What are some like products, services, resources, podcasts, books, or something that someone could buy off of Amazon? Like, what are some things that you have found helping yourself or your clients that they might be able to kind of help enhance their journey?
First thing I'm going to answer to that is, it actually sounds like not an answer, but I'm going to caution people against purchasing books that are overly clinical. I think one of the struggles that a lot of people have in this day and age, because we all have, if you have a smartphone, you have the compendium of all human knowledge in your pocket at any given time of day. There are a lot of texts out there that are that were written for clinicians. It assumes a certain level of clinical and practical knowledge of planning and conducting treatment. So just like I can read all the words in a textbook on particle physics, doesn't mean I'm going to be able to create a what am I looking for? A mass spectrometer or a hadron collider or anything like that. It's not in my wheelhouse because I don't have the educational background on it. Now, that's not to say that people shouldn't be allowed to look at these things, but it's one of those, like, look for things that are for common people. Common, good Lord. Look for things that are written for regular folks who haven't been through a graduate program in mental health treatment. So what you want to look for there are some of the more popular books. I think what I'm working through right now, I have a couple of technique manuals that I'm working through that were written for therapists, and that's what I'm talking about. So you probably don't want a 300-page textbook on treating PTSD using EMDR. It might not help. But I am working through The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, because I do work with a fair number of adolescents and young adults. And one of the things I find is that they do have a fair amount of anxiety issues that aren't necessarily present in some of the older generations, not because there's anything wrong with them, but because if you look at the conditions under which they grew up, it's not surprising that they end up there. In terms of podcasts, I've done a few podcasts. Largely the ones that I've done are mental health industry focused. So I've been on the private practice startup, things along those lines that are more, this is how therapists do therapy kind of things, but it's also useful. There are a few useful, easy to understand podcasts out there. And what I would encourage you to do is search either therapy or counseling, something along those lines, on your favorite platform, whether that's Spotify, the Apple Podcasts platform, or any of the others, and then take a listen to about the first 10 minutes of any given show that you think might be useful. And if you find yourself coming through that wondering, what did I just listen to, or what do 7 out of 15 words mean, then that's probably not the show for you. But if you listen to it and you go, oh, that makes a lot of sense, then okay, that's probably a podcast you should stick with. In fact, let me pull up my podcast library here real quick. We can talk about the ones that I have subscriptions to. I'll also warn you that a lot of my podcast consumption has more to do with fitness or outdoors activities or things like that than it does with therapy. But let's see. Mental Illness Happy Hour is actually a really good one. I'm also subscribed to the Counselor Toolbox podcast. That one's by Dr. Donnelly Snipes, who's fantastic, but she explains in very technical detail how certain therapy techniques work. So if you find yourself working with a therapist and you're unsure of the technique they're using, then that's a good one to go and search the episodes for the type of therapy that they're using and see how that's supposed to be helping you. Or you could do what I often recommend to people, and simply ask the question of the therapist trying to conduct the technique, what is this supposed to be doing? If you don't feel like it's working, you're in charge in the therapy room. It's perfectly okay to say, hey, I don't think this is working. What is this supposed to be doing? Books, the reading list that I keep handy has to do with mental health as it pertains to combat veterans. So I recommend any of the books by Colonel Retired Dave Grossman. So that's On Killing and On Combat. It talks about the psychology of warfare and what a lot of that really looks like. So if you have a veteran in your life that you have trouble understanding, take a look at those. If they are a more modern day veteran, then I recommend Sebastian Junger's book Tribe, which is all about folks returning from war and how that historically went in cultures where you didn't have some of the mental health struggles that you see in veteran populations today. And a lot of it has to do with how they were received back, how much ownership the society took of what they asked the average soldier or warrior, depending on the culture that we're talking about, to do on their behalf. The fact that the society accepted that they did ask them to do things on their behalf and didn't attempt to dissociate and distance themselves from the war effort.
Would it be possible perhaps to get that list from you, and we can add it to the bottom of this in the description? Anyway.
Yeah, happy to share that. That's the same reading list that I share with practices and clinicians who I work with who are trying to get into treating military veterans and first responders, but are just not quite there because they chose to go straight through their clinical training after their undergrad work. So they haven't had some of the experiences that I've had.
It's been a great conversation. Thank you for bringing your wisdom, for your experience and presence onto this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Brett.